Hello everyone and Assalamu alaikum. My name is Elif Shafak and I'm an author, historian and columnist based in Pakistan. Today with us we have the famous journalist and now author Declan Walsh. Declan is a well-known journalist and he's just published his first book called 9 Lives of Pakistan. Declan was based in Pakistan, first as a bureau chief for The Guardian and then the New York Times. He was in Pakistan for a good 10 years, a decade. Declan has also written for The Independent and the Irish Times, newspaper of his country of birth, Ireland. He's very well traveled. He's reported from various countries in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. Declan has also had the honor of being expelled from Pakistan in 2013. And we will be talking to him about that as well, even though he's mentioned that in his book in detail. And I've always been a huge fan of books written by experienced journalists, and Declan is definitely one of those journalists. And I thoroughly enjoyed the book, which I finished in just three sittings last evening. It is soon going to be available in Pakistan as well. So hello, Declan, and welcome.
Hi, Nadeem. Great to be with you.
Declan, my first question is, you were based in Pakistan for 10 years from, I think, 2004 to 2013. Am I right?
That's right.
And these were, I would say, especially the years 2007 and 2013, these were one of the most turbulent and violent years in the history of Pakistan. And I remember we used to chat a lot on the phone because you were always looking for stories. And in one of the conversations, you did tell me that you were planning to write a book on your experience as a foreign journalist in Pakistan. And you plan to call it Inshallah Nation or Inshallah Pakistan. And the first chapter is definitely Inshallah Pakistan, but the book's title changed to 9 Lives of Pakistan, which is equally telling. So was it your decision to change the title, or was the publisher's decision? And why did they do it, if they did it?
Yeah, thanks, Nadeem. That is a very canny question. And I can tell you that a typically canny question, I should say. And, you know, the truth of the matter is that, yes, well, firstly, you're right, it was called Inshallah Nation for many years. That was the working title. And in fact, an earlier version of this book even had a cover at one point, which was Inshallah Nation. But, you know, ultimately, the book as it's constituted now is being published by publishers in the US and in the UK. The publishers in the US in particular, you know, ultimately, you know, push back against that title. I think they felt that it was going to be difficult, complicated to unpack for readers in that market. You know, I'm not sure that they particularly they didn't sort of think that readers would object to Inshallah itself, but I think that the illusion and, you know, what are we trying to say with the tone of Inshallah? I think that they thought it's going to take too much to explain that to a foreign reader. And so ultimately I bowed to what they thought, and we moved to the second title, which I'm equally happy with. And in a way, actually, it is truer to the structure of the book, which is that, you know, the book is character driven, if you like. It is structured around the lives of these 9 people that I, you know, focus on, and that most of whom I knew quite well when I was in Pakistan. And you know, I thought that in a way, actually, it probably provided like a better distillation of the idea behind the book. And, you know, and really, you know, the kind of, in writing the book, you know, I hoped to reach a readership that it's not aimed at an expert readership about Pakistan. There have been many amazing books written by scholars and written by people who are really better versed than me in the intricacies of any one part of Pakistani life, such as, you know, the politics or militancy or culture and so on. And this book is, as you saw, is a kind of much broader book that kind of aims really for the reader who knows something about Pakistan, but really is somewhat confused about how it all fits together. And in a way, this book is my effort to, you know, try and use the very combustible period where I lived in the country, where you had, you know, one explosive thing after another, you know, at this kind of dizzying speed from 2007 on, as you say. Really the starting gun was the Red Mosque, the siege of the Red Mosque. And to use all of these incidents and the people who lived through them to try and, you know, pull together the threads about what makes Pakistan tick, and, you know, what are its problems, what are its pathologies, what are its strengths, you know, draw out those threads through the lens of those things. So in the end, you know, even though I was rather fond of Inshallah Nation, I thought, you know, I came up with that title with the help of a friend who lives in Islamabad. I remember I was sitting in my living room, and, you know, I was racking my brains trying to think of a title, and she said, oh, you know, everyone here is always Inshallah, and it suddenly came to me, Inshallah Nation. But, you know, in the end, actually, sometimes you have to listen to the publisher, and, you know, maybe their instinct was right, that this is a, you know, a better way to explain what we're trying to say.
No, I agree. It's a Nine Lives of Pakistan. I think it's excellent, and you're right. The way after I read the book, and it made sense that this was a more befitting title than just Inshallah Pakistan, which I think is good enough as a chapter in your book. So now we are going to talk about something you've written in detail. You've written about in detail in your book, so you can just briefly explain it. This is your expulsion from Pakistan. Just one day before the 2013 election, the state of Pakistan asked you to pack up and leave within 72 hours. Now, you were surprised. You couldn't realize, you couldn't understand why they were asking you to leave. And in the book, it took you about another 5 years to figure out exactly what happened. But I remember when you did one of your last major features in Pakistan before you left was on Balochistan. And I remember when that story came out, and I thought to myself, it's time for Techni to go home. And I wasn't surprised. So why were you surprised?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I guess the truth of the matter is that, you know, just in the course of being a journalist in Pakistan during that period, through so many dramatic events, inevitably I had done like a series of stories that I think, you know, the authorities, particularly the military authorities, you know, would not have been happy with. And, you know, there were definitely occasions on which they made it clear that they didn't like what I'd done, right? You know, I'd certainly written about Balochistan. I had written a long piece about human rights abuses in Balochistan for The Guardian, for G2, the feature section of The Guardian, in 2010, I think, 2010 or 2011. And, you know, and that was definitely one of those pieces where a lot of people like you and others who specialized in Balochistan or who thought about Balochistan a lot really thought that I was, you know, pushing the envelope a little bit there. But, you know, I published that piece. There was some pushback, but it was okay. You know, after Osama bin Laden was killed, I wrote a long piece about the inner workings of the ISI. Again, you know, there was certainly some criticism, I'm sure, but, you know, mostly it was fine. So, you know, by the time of 2013, yes, you know, I had been to Balochistan again. I had done a piece about the Hazara. I'd done several pieces about the attacks on the Hazara. I did pieces about young men who were having to leave. And, you know, I'd written about the tribal belt and so on, and about drone strikes. But I guess one thing that did change in the run up to 2013 and the kind of the year or two before is that I switched newspapers. So whereas I'd been working for The Guardian for, I guess 7 or 8 years, in late 2011, I took a job with the New York Times, basically doing the same job, just working for the New York Times instead. And I think that brought a new level, a new kind of scrutiny to my work. Suddenly I think people saw me as, a kind of an agent of, some people saw me as, someone who was somehow representing the United States or representing the US government in the work that I did. And of course, the truth is I was reporting the same way I'd reported before. But, sometimes it's all about perception. And, in retrospect, after I was kicked out, when I kind of thought a lot harder about it, as you said, initially I was really stunned when this guy comes to my gate. I was at a friend's house. It was 3 nights before the election. I was at a friend's house I lived in F8, and there was a friend's house, I think, in F6 in Islamabad. And, I get this call, I'm having a drink and something to eat. It was quite late. It was like 11:30, almost midnight. And I get this call, and it's from a number I didn't recognize, or an unknown number. And it's this person who, on the other end, says that he's a policeman, or he's with the security, and that, I have to come home immediately. So I went home, and when we got to the gate in my house, I find this police wagon with, I don't know, maybe 8 people in the back of it, sitting outside. And then this gentleman who is, in shalwar kameez, steps out, and the policemen then are around him, and he hands me this letter. And, he looked sort of somewhat, he was not aggressive. He's like, oh, please, sir, take this. And I took it. And then he's like, no, please, maybe you should read it. So I opened it, and it was a very short letter. It just said, on account of your undesirable activities, your visa is cancelled forthwith, and you have 72 hours to leave the country. And then I think I've written this in the book, but then he asked me to sign for the letter, which I thought was really, the ultimate mark of like a South Asian bureaucracy is that even when you're getting expelled, they want you to like sign on the dotted line. Yeah. And then I went inside, and I, initially I couldn't. I'm like, what? I couldn't figure out that I had done anything immediately prior to this that led to it. But with the fullness of time, when I thought about it afterwards, and kind of the drama of the moment, and of having to, there was, eventually they ended up taking me into kind of a custody and holding me in a hotel and driving me to the airport. But once all that had subsided, I realized that there actually had been a number of signs of tension with the authorities in the months leading up to it that I don't think I'd understood how serious it was at the time. There had been, I had received some threats. I had received word of like what was described to me as a Taliban death threat. Someone who worked with me had received a message from someone who purported to be from the Taliban saying that I was under threat, and it was not clear that that actually did come from the Taliban. I received other warnings that there had been from a foreign embassy in Islamabad who said, oh, we've received information that someone's making threats about you in Balochistan. And then also some months prior to that, my visa had been up for renewal, and somebody, one of the security agencies tried to block the renewal of my visa. And it was only thanks to the government at the time, the Interior Ministry, that my visa was renewed. So it was clear that, actually, if I'd been paying a bit more attention to the signs, I might have realized actually that this kind of thing was on the cards. But, even so, it was really not clear to me why I had been, what had been the trigger. Clearly they were unhappy. Clearly people were unhappy. It became clear to me pretty quickly that it was the ISI that was behind the expulsion, even though the letterhead of the expulsion letter said Interior Ministry. But you got to remember that at that time, it was just before the election, so you had a transition, not a transition, an interim government in place. And so all of the ministers, including the interior minister, are all technocrats, placeholders who were just there for the duration of the election. So you know, even though the order was signed by an official in the Interior Ministry, really, you know, it was clear that it was not really the Interior Ministry that was behind this. So you know, it was really not clear to me, you know, had I written something about the drones, had I written something about politics, you know, what had I done exactly? And that was kind of in a way a starting point for the book, where I had to think really hard about what was it that, you know, because people would always keep saying this. I mean, even before I was kicked out, and certainly afterwards, people were messaging. I remember I was getting text messages, and there was speculation on social media, and friends would call, and they'd be like, "So what exactly have you done?" You know, with the sort of raised eyebrow, you know, that was kind of a starting point in the book, in a way, for my own part of it. I mean, the book is not really about me, but it is framed by my expulsion and, you know, kind of a resolution of that at the end. And the resolution was trying to find out, you know, what was it that prompted it? Like, why was it worth the trouble? You know, why did it happen at what seemed like such a weird time? Because this is just 2 or 3 days before an election. You know, I left on the day of the election. This election in 2013 that was kind of a historic election. You know, it was the first time that there was one civilian government had served its full term, was going to, you know, pass power to another civilian government. You know, in a way, this was like Pakistan showing that it's really progressed, and it's gone beyond its image of being this place with the kind of faulty democracy, to put it mildly. And all of a sudden they're taking this action against a member of the international press from a prominent newspaper. So they knew that this was going to get some attention. And so it didn't really make sense to me why they would do it at that time, you know. And so that as I said, that was a starting point in the book. You know, why me, and why then, and what was the story?
Very interesting point you made, that since most probably it was also because you switched newspapers from the UK's Guardian to the American NYT. And I remember when you were asked to leave a few days later, and you mentioned that in your book as well, some Urdu tabloids described you that you were actually a embedded CIA agent. So that was that, I guess. But
there was, you know, there was a lot of, when we were, I mean, I talk about this a little bit in the book, but, you know, after I was expelled, the New York Times' newspaper, and me as an individual, we, you know, went to the Pakistani authorities at every level, you know, at the Prime Minister's office, the intelligence services, and we said, you know, we don't understand this. Please help us to understand why this is happening, and we would like to rectify it. I mean, I wanted to come. I really wanted to come back to Pakistan. You know, I'd lived in the country for over 9 years at that point. I had so many friends and connections. My life was there, and it was really disconcerting to be pulled out of it so kind of violently, you know. And we really wanted to go back, and we kept saying, please tell us why. And they kept sort of obfuscating and saying, oh yes, obviously. I mean, it's the classic way that sometimes bureaucracies deal with these issues, is they'll never say yes, they'll never say no. They just kind of say, I mean, in fact, it's a version of Bukra Inshallah, right? They're just like, no, we'll keep, we'll hold another meeting. Let us get back to you, and so on. And that there was never a clear answer.
But maybe, who knows? Maybe had you posted some positive vlogs and positive tweets, you might have still been there in Pakistan with your visa being extended over and over again. Anyways, let's move on. You met Benazir Bhutto in Dubai just before she returned from exile, returned to Pakistan. And you discussed the Bhuttos briefly, but in a very interesting sentence, which I'll read here, you wrote that Bhutto dynasty, the Bhuttos were one of South Asia's great political dynasties, part Greek tragedy and part godfather. Please elaborate on this. I found this to be very interesting statement and sentence.
What's the question, sorry?
So I was saying you wrote describing the Bhuttos that as a political dynasty, the Bhuttos are part Greek tragedy and part godfather. So what made you write that? What observation?
I was trying to find a way to encapsulate, the Bhuttos just have the most incredible story. I mean, there's a separate book coming out soon by Owen Bennett-Jones just about the Bhuttos.
Yeah, I know.
I'm really going to delve. I think I'm really looking forward to reading it. But of course, the kind of the drama of the Bhutto story, really, it's just impossible to make it up, right? With multiple different generations of this family, really at the forefront, at the cutting edge of not just of politics in Pakistan, but also of the evolution of the country. I mean, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, coming to power in 1971 was really, a turning point in the country in many ways, and his death, of course, was, the trauma, I think, for everybody, not just for supporters of his party, but for, the country as a whole. I think it really scarred people. I mean, even for those who didn't like him or, had been affected by nationalization or didn't like his manner, or even people, as I recount in the book, people like Azmat Jahangir's father, people who had been sort of betrayed by him or abused by him. So, but the fact that here you have the first prime minister and he's hanged by a military ruler was, I think, a trauma that, in fact, still, hangs large over Pakistan. It's kind of like the military, laying out a line saying, this is actually how far we're prepared to go. It sort of redefined the rules of the game, so you have all of that, but within that you just have the individual stories of members of that family. And I was very influenced by, of course, there's all of the corruption accusations and so on around Benazir and her husband, and the context in which those occurred. But there's also the dramas around Shah Nawaz and Murtaza, and running off to Afghanistan, or living in exile in Syria and Libya, as they did. The death of Shah Nawaz in this mysterious poisoning in the south of France. Before Benazir came back, as you say, I did go to see her in Dubai. And I met her husband there as well, because he had just been released from prison. He'd been in and out of prison for years. And I guess as part of the reconciliation between Musharraf and Benazir at that point, Asif Ali Zardari had been released and was allowed to go back to Dubai. And I went there at a moment when the Zardari was encouraging journalists to come, because he was about to make a trip to Pakistan on a plane that they chartered, if I recall. And the whole idea was to kind of test the water for Benazir to return. Now, in the end, it was kind of a flop. We flew from Dubai to Lahore, and then immediately on arrival, there was the police everywhere and Musharraf's people, and Zardari was taken off the plane unceremoniously, and that was the end of that. But it was, it sort of foreshadowed what was to come with Benazir returning. So sorry, I've lost my train of thought there now. So, So at that point, I met Benazir, and then later, after that incident, I went down to Larkana to visit, the family home and the mausoleum in Gari Khuda Bakhsh, and I went to see Uncle Mumtaz. And going to his home, it's kind of like a hacienda, and he was very generous. He welcomed me and someone I was with and brought us in for lunch, and we chatted. But he just presented a whole other side to the Bhutto story from someone who was Benazir's uncle, but clearly didn't have a lot of complimentary things to say about her either. And then after that trip, I went down to Karachi, where Fatima Bhutto and her mother were living, and I spent some time, I spent an evening with them, and they told me about their perspective on it as well. And so, you know, you put all of this together and you have, you know, this family that has been right at the edge of one of the defining things about Pakistan, this, you know, clash between the military and the civilian politicians. But within it as well, I mean, there are just these vicious rivalries and accusations, and members of the family accusing other members of, you know, having them people killed or poisoned, and so on and so on. So yeah, when I was writing the book, I tried to find a way to distill all of those ideas in a couple of simple sentences, and you picked out one of them there.
Yeah. In the earlier chapters, when you were building up towards the whole narrative of the book, you wrote that my notebooks filled with scenes and characters: a dirty Harry cop who enforced the law by breaking it, a poetry-quoting tribal chief readying for war at his desert fort, a movie star who shocked Pakistanis by posing topless for an Indian men's magazine. And you also wrote that I started to receive as well as make requests for Safarish. And then you get into one of the most amusing parts in your book, stories in your book, is when on one Saturday evening, you get a call from a political contact. And without saying hello or anything, he says, "Don't you remember telling me about the cat house?" And then, as if giving the phone to someone else, he said, "Could you please explain that to the officer?" And the call got dropped. In a few days' time, on YouTube or on television, you managed to see a report, a film report on a raid on a brothel in Islamabad called the Cat House. And the interesting bit is you actually managed to see the same guy, and you saw him holding a phone and screaming, "Could you explain this to the officer? Don't you remember telling me this is a cat house?" So was there a cat house, and did you tell him about the cat house?
Oh, there definitely was a cat house. And you know, you can actually, if you Google it, you'll find the police account of that raid. And in fact, the last time I checked, you can find that video that I referred to was available online. So yeah, there certainly was a cat house. No, I had not told him about the cat house. This was the point. I think I had this was, I guess, actually not very long after maybe the 2008 election. You know, this guy was a kind of very garrulous, very friendly guy who was a wheeler dealer from Sindh, let's say. And, you know, he was a figure in one of the parties, and we had met to talk about politics. That was it, you know. And, you know, he was a nice guy. And we gotten along and we swapped numbers. And I guess, you know, I didn't speak to him about this afterwards. And, you know, in the newspapers, it did say that, you know, he and some other people had been detained by the police. And then there was this kind of cryptic reference in the news reports that really, you know, is written in this kind of language you sometimes see in the papers in Pakistan, especially in the local press, that, you know, has a bunch of words that say one thing, but actually have a whole hidden meaning that you just know. Yeah. And so the report basically said that, you know, these guys used their own connections and got sprung out by some politician, and I think no charges were brought against them. No, there was no, there was, I was as surprised as anyone to learn about the cat house, actually. And, you know, it turned out that it was you know, an entertainment establishment in, I think, F9 or no, maybe F10 or F11 in Islamabad. It was in a big, you know, 2 or 3 story mansion. And when you look at the video that's available online, you can see, you know, for some reason, I guess the police were filming it, and for some reason also they decided to put it on the internet. You will see, you know, various ladies sitting in the lobby of this place from Eastern Europe and other places, looking pretty unhappy that the police are now all over it. And you see that, you know, you see alcohol, and then you see them walking through the corridors. And then at one point, you see this man standing in the corridor with a policeman beside him, yelling into his phone going, you know, tell them I told you about the cat house.
Basically talking to you.
Yeah.
Okay, you've uh, you've covered Pakistan's history as well in your book. And when I say history, you've also talked about the economic and political reasons that led to the creation of Pakistan. Now, as we all know, that Pakistan has a lot of histories. You know, every like the left has their own idea, the liberal left has their own idea, the religious right has their own idea. So I'm sure while you were investigating Pakistan history, you came across numerous narratives. So how did you pick and choose which narrative to use out of so many that you came across?
You know, I'm not sure that I made a conscious decision to pick one narrative, but I was very conscious when I started to think about how to structure the book that, you know, Pakistan's history and its creation and what happened in the years leading up to partition was kind of an unavoidable, was something I had to grapple with in the book. Like I really felt like I had to explain that to the reader. I didn't want it to be, especially for a foreign reader. You know, I had a couple of one Pakistani reader in particular who read the book and kind of was like, why are you bothering with all this history? You know, we kind of know this, and, you know, anyone who wants to know about this can find many excellent books that just are about this, this history, you know, what happened in India, pre-partition India, and what happened in the immediate aftermath. And so that's a fair criticism, but actually I felt strongly that for readers who are not familiar with all of this, they need to know this is important context to understand what's happening now, is what happened 70 odd years ago. And, you know, the way that I went about that ultimately was to, you know, to turn that also into a chapter that focused on a personality. And the obvious personality, of course, was Jinnah, because, you know, what Jinnah said or did not say in the years leading up to the creation of Pakistan, you know, is still contested, or is still debated, or is still manipulated. And I was really, you know, I was really struck when I was there, you know, how much, when I lived in Pakistan, how much people invoked Jinnah's name from the right and from the left, you know. And I think, as I said wrote in the book at one point, it seemed that, you know, Jinnah could be tailored much like his own shirts. Like you could have your own, Jinnah was kind of like a doll that you could dress however you wanted, you know, to suit your own version of Pakistani history. And, you know, I mean, I would defer to, you know, much greater authorities on these things like you, but it really seemed to me that, you know, the history of the country was being exploited by people on all sides to make their point. And I guess in the book, part of the conclusion I come to is that, you know, there is actually no one narrative about what happened. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest there was a lot of confusion even at the time, even about what Jinnah himself intended for the country, because he was guilty of saying one thing and, you know, doing the other. And he pandered to religious lobbies in order to, you know, get Pakistan passed in the elections in 1946, I think.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, of course, he gave that famous address, you know, in Karachi on August 12th, where he gave the speech that is endlessly quoted. You know, you should go to your temples and so on, and you're free to practice whatever religion you wish. And I see that tension playing out all the time I was there. I see it playing out now. I mean, I see it playing out in the, you know, the incident a couple of days ago where a Christian in Lahore was sentenced to death on account of a text message that he sent somebody, apparently. You know, so, you know, that relationship between, you know, is this a country that is only for Muslims, and is this a country that is run according to some version of Sharia law, or is this a country that you know, is a safe haven for Muslims? Reflects a predominantly Muslim people and a Muslim culture, you know, but also protects its minorities. And I think that's been the kind of litmus test for the project of Pakistan, if you like, over much of the last number of decades. You know, how does it protect minorities, because you can judge a country not by the strength of its army, certainly, and you can't judge a country by the strength of its you can judge a country by the strength of its ideas, and you can judge a country by how it treats its weakest and most vulnerable members. And yeah, anyway, I'm veering off in another direction here, but I guess, I hope it comes through the book that I, really embraced living in Pakistan, and I loved living there in many ways. But there were aspects of the country, of course, that were really quite disturbing to me. And I really felt that this issue of blasphemy that seems to have only gotten worse is definitely part of that. The issues that I struggled to understand, I struggled to kind of peel apart. And so to get back to your original question, I think that the history part of it was, for me, an important way to kind of start getting to the root of where these things come from.
No, I totally agree, and I'm glad you mentioned you sort of agreed or has put this aspect in the book, because it gives the book historical context, and I agree that especially for readers outside Pakistan. Now, one of the characters which you discuss at least 9 important characters. So one of the characters you discussed is Abdul Rashid Ghazi, the Red Mosque militant. Now, I found that to be a very interesting chapter, one of the most interesting chapters in your book is, and I remember I was also investigating Ghazi about 2-3 years ago, and I was more interested in what Abdul Rashid Ghazi was before he became a militant. And I think you did a fantastic job in discovering that Abdul Rashid Ghazi had rebelled against his father, who was very religious. Abdul Rashid Ghazi, when he was just Abdul Rashid, was a student at the Quaid-e-Azam University in the 1980s. And in those days, in the 1980s, Quaid-e-Azam University was almost a hotbed of progressive student politics. And Abdul Rashid Ghazi was interested in Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. He wanted to go and join the United Nations. And then his father's assassination happened, and he flipped, he changed. So where did you get, for example, when I was investigating Ghazi, there were very few people who were willing to talk about this chap or his life, or this guy's life before he turned into a sudden militant. What were the sources? Who did you meet who remembered Abdul Rashid Ghazi not as a militant, but as a happy-go-lucky student of the Quaid-e-Azam University?
Yeah, I was lucky. Like you, and I think I'd even discussed some of this with you when I was researching it, because I'd read one of the articles you'd written in Dawn about it, which was, really helped me to get going on that idea. I used contacts I had to try and get to his former classmates, and I got to a couple of them. And so I went through some of his former teachers, and through that I got to some of his former classmates. And there's one gentleman who was extremely helpful, who had been very close to Abdul Rashid Ghazi, and who who spoke to me on record, and he's quoted in the book. And he was this very generous man, very brave in the way he spoke about it. And I think when I reached him, my sense was that he really felt he had a story that had been sitting inside him for a long time untold about his friend, and he wanted people to know about it. He wanted people to know that this person who, was portrayed in the media and portrayed internationally as this kind of terrorist cleric, was also his friend, and that they had a relationship for many years that was grounded in things that had nothing to do with extremism or terrorism, and in fact were grounded in music and poetry and fun and jokes. And he described Abdul Rashid Ghazi to me. I said, well, what was he like as a student? And he sort of said, well, he was a bit of a nerd. He said he was fascinated by I think mobile phones were very new at the time, and I'm sure they were huge. And he was fascinated by these new technologies that had come along. He would play pranks on his friends. Sometimes, I think, did he say that they used a burqa at one point to disguise to get into some group to spring a surprise on somebody? I mean, he did have he was the son of this firebrand cleric, who held forth in the Red Mosque in Islamabad every Friday, who had been very close to General Zia, who, you know, was part of the kind of sectarian framework that really caught fire in the 80s in Pakistan, you know, attacks between Sipa Sahaba and Shia groups and so on. So he was in the middle of that, and Abdul Rashid Ghazi grew up in this context. But, you know, there was a lot to suggest that in high school, and then when he went to university, like you say, it really broadened his horizons. And this guy had actually a very kind of curious, gentle disposition. And when I first met him about 4 or 5 months before the siege took place, you know, when they started getting in the headlines, I went to see him in the Red Mosque, and that meeting is described in the book. When I went to see him, I was really struck by, you know, on the one hand, here's this man that had these, you know, at that point, quite extreme views about where Pakistan should be, talking about a caliphate and so on and so on. And on the other hand, but his manner was just still that college student who was, you know, curious and affable and kind of keen to please, or keen to engage. And I think he really liked the back and forth with journalists, and he liked exchanging ideas. And, you know, he reminded me of like a kind of like a guy you would actually still see in a university, like some guy who's like a tutor who's been there forever, and he's kind of shuffling around the campus with his, you know, ragged clothes, and he likes, you know, hanging out with the young students and offering advice. He really struck me as kind of that kind of guy, you know, and that was, you know, and as I said, despite everything that was going on at that time, despite what his ideas, which I certainly didn't share, you know, I kind of liked the guy, you know, and again, it was great as a lesson about him. It was also just a lesson more broadly about, again, you know, for me, Pakistan was this country where it was characterized by a couple of things when I worked there. One was the amazing access you would have to all sorts of people from across society. And, you know, I can tell you, having worked in many countries, you know, that have turbulent politics and stuff, Pakistan is a place where you, as a foreign journalist, you do get to meet abroad. People want to talk to you. You know, they have all sorts of different motivations for talking to you. They're not pure, but they want to chat. And that's a great thing for a journalist. And then the second thing about Abdul Rashid Ghazi that stemmed from that was that he, God, I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, no, that it was also just about how, you know, these people at the center of these dramatic events are not caricatures. You know, they're people with 360-degree lives and sometimes complicated histories. And, you know, I mean, his brother Abdulaziz was, and still is, as he's, you know, still around, still a feature on the landscape in Islamabad, I believe. You know, his brother Abdulaziz, you know, so I didn't get to know so well. I did meet him a couple of times, but I did not get to know him so well. And, you know, he does fit more into the mold of what you would expect from someone who would run at the Red Mosque. But Abdul Rashid Ghazi was not that guy. And I remember being in that hotel, the Holiday Inn, the Holiday Inn, close to the Red Mosque when the siege was going on, and Abdul Rashid Ghazi was on TV, is kind of negotiating, you know, live on TV with, I can't remember, Kamran Khan or Hamid Mir or somebody, you know, about what there was, and Aftab Sharpa was on the other line, and you know, I remember at that point thinking, gosh, here's this guy. I didn't think he was this extremist guy, and I kind of predicted that, you know, I don't think he was making threats about dying. I was like, no, he's a politician. He wants to live. And in the end, tragically for him and for his family, that's not how it worked out.
Yeah, I agree, because there were reports that he wanted to end the siege, and people around him, the militants, they said, no, you have to die now. That's the only way.
And you know, just to add to that quickly, I mean, certainly when I spoke to some of his, you know, former classmates, they really certainly subscribed to this idea that, you know, somehow he became enthralled to, or he became a prisoner of some of these groups that surrounded him, you know, that he certainly encouraged them to come in, But once they came in, then he was kind of, you know, trapped a bit by what he had done.
Okay, I have a few, three more questions, and then we have a few questions from the viewers. And now, one of the most heartbreaking chapters which I felt was on a chap called Colonel Imam. Colonel Imam, as we all know, was legendary in the 1980s as one of the main facilitators of between the United States and Saudi Arabia, and how they sort of funded the jihad and ISI, of course. And he was very close to the Mujahideen during the anti-Soviet jihad, and he became very famous. And even though he wasn't a Pashtun, he started to believe that he was a Pashtun. And you're right, people, and you wrote that as time went on, he became a true believer in jihad. And he also became very close to the Afghan Taliban when they came into power in 1996 with the help of the Pakistanis and the Saudis. And yet, his end was that he got shot in the head and died, killed by the same people he once told you he loved. You know, because as you mentioned that you met Colonel Imam on a few occasions, and while the Taliban were going around bombing markets and schools and mosques, Colonel Imam, you wrote that he still had was very sympathetic towards the Taliban, and it's the same Taliban who shot him in the head. So while you were talking to him, did you feel that this guy is still living in the 1980s of his glory days, and that there's a whole new generation of militants have come up who are far more nihilistic, far more anarchic, and really don't give a damn about people like him? Did you feel that this guy is just has lost contact with reality?
You know, in the beginning, I didn't look at it like that. I think for me, the mystery when I approached him at first was that there were a lot of rumors and, you know, talk among journalists at the time that Colonel Imam was part of a kind of secret policy on the part of the security forces to support these groups. And that, you know, even though he was retired, he was actually still, you know, in the game, roaming around, talking to these militant groups and helping them. And, you know, I'm not sure I really resolved that question, actually, because, you know, I've heard all versions of that, actually, about whether that really is what was going on or not. And, you know, I think there's some degree of wishful thinking on the part of people who watch the ISI to think that things are more organized than they are. And sometimes, you know, something that's as obvious as that is not actually the truth. So but as time went on, to get to your point, I think it became clear that whatever role he had with these groups, and he certainly was in touch with some of them. I mean, when he went to Waziristan in 2010, I guess, you know, to help this British journalist, he did go there with a kind of mission to try and reach out to the Pakistani Taliban, and along with Khalid Khwaja, to start a back-channel negotiation between the Taliban in Waziristan, led by Hakimullah Masood, and the government in Islamabad to stop the violence and stop the attacks. So it's clear that, you know, he did still have dealings with these groups. But I think you have two groups. You know, you have the Afghan Taliban, who at that period, you know, were very much present in Balochistan in particular, and in other parts of the frontier, and were going from there into Afghanistan. And then you had their Pakistani cousins, you know, led by Baitullah Masood, and these guys were much closer to Al-Qaeda. You know, many of them they were being fired at by American drones all the time. Let's not forget that. They were very brutal in their methods, and they also had a very strong sectarian undertow. You know, early on, when Hakimullah Masood came to prominence in Pakistan, was when his men, before he even became leader of the Taliban, kidnapped, I think, you know, several hundred Pakistani soldiers, you know, humiliated them in South Waziristan. And that episode was humiliating for the military, and let's not forget, it only ended when the soldiers were returned, except for the Shias, who were singled out and executed. So you know, the Pakistani Taliban had this like vicious sectarian streak. Not to say that the Afghan Taliban were angels. They had done plenty of bad as well, but they were of a different ilk. And I think that ultimately, you know, Colonel Imam misunderstood exactly how radicalized these Pakistani Taliban had become. You know, he clearly thought that his reputation and his knowledge of these groups and his safarish, for want of a better word, you know, his ability to just use his contacts and get through this world would get him out of a sticky situation in Waziristan when they got kidnapped. And it turned out that in a way, maybe he'd forgotten that actually the guys that he was closest to were several generations ago. Those guys they've moved on, they're older, some of them are dead, right? And this new generation that was coming up in Waziristan, you know, they didn't care about the history. They felt that the Pakistan military, you know, had kind of betrayed them by allying with the US after 9/11, right? And allowing the operation from the tribal belt in the early 2000s, and then of course basically facilitating the drone campaign. So they were angry. They blamed the military, and even though for much of his life Colonel Imam presented himself as someone who occupied two identities, you know, as an officer in the Pakistani military and in the intelligence in the ISI, but also he also occupied his identity kind of, you know, as someone who was a true believer in jihad and, you know, believed that this kind of warfare was empowering, was bringing pride to these Pashtuns. He really kind of venerated the Pashtun, well, one aspect of the Pashtun culture. He represented the violent aspect, or he venerated the violent aspects of Pashtun culture. And there's also a kind of national, almost like an anti-colonial impulse. You know, here were the Americans meddling in Afghanistan, meddling in our region. You know, it is our duty to get them out. And so, and I think what he misunderstood was that for these new generation of guys that had come along, they didn't see him as a fellow traveler in that second identity. They just saw him as a representative of the Pakistani military. And ultimately, their relationship with the Pakistani military was a transactional one. You know, it was, sure, we're all friends when you help us, but at the moment when our interests diverge, you're now our enemy. And that's how it played out more broadly in Waziristan. And tragically for Colonel Imam, that's how it played out for him. You know, in his capture and his mistreatment and his death. And again, a little bit like Abdul Rashid Ghazi, you know, here's another guy with a very complicated personal history, you know, who had been involved in all sorts of stuff that, you know, certainly to an outsider represents, you know, the really, you know, dark parts of Pakistan's history or journey over the years. And, you know, again, you know, I like a lot of people I met, I hung out with them and I rather enjoyed his company, you know, and I was sad when he died.
Yeah, because you see, thousands of Pakistani soldiers, civilians died, and you were here when this whole extremism and terrorism thing was happening, and it peaked. Even though after 2015, a lot of these groups were finally neutralized by the military, but unfortunately, lessons are still not being learned, and we're still creating Frankenstein monsters. In a chapter, you discuss two personalities, two women, both coming from privileged backgrounds, but ended up at the center of various human rights struggles against military dictators, extremists. One is Benazir Bhutto, and the other is Asma Jahangir. I mean, these two were heroes of my generation, of young men who grew up in the 1980s. So you watched them both, you talked to them both, and you saw them interact as well. And they have a very interesting relationship. They supported each other, but Asma could be very critical of Benazir Bhutto as well. And Benazir was very patient with it. And in fact, Asma didn't want Benazir to come back because she was scared that she will be killed. So what made them come together, and what were the similarities and what were the differences between the two?
You know, in short, I started off with, in fact, when I was putting the book together, I ended up at various times considering a chapter on either one of those two women, on both of those women separately. And then in the end, especially after Asma died, she gave a speech in Oxford where she spoke about her relationship with Benazir. And I started to slowly realize that actually these women were joined by, that their lives had intersected in a way that I didn't know about, that I was not aware of. And so, you know, it really seemed to me that actually these are two stories that complemented each other, and kind of for me opened a window on, you know, a number of different things, you know, partly about their shared politics, where, you know, they were both, you know, people certainly faulted Benazir, but, you know, even Asma Jahangir had certainly her fair share of critics, you know, from the right and even from the left in her lifetime. Yeah. And so, you know, you could fault both, or you know, both of them were open to criticism, but they were joined by this absolutely cast iron belief in the supremacy of civilian politics and civilian rule in Pakistan. And, you know, so for me, this was an opportunity to, you know, to explain that perspective, but it was also an opportunity, you know, to talk about the role of prominent women and in Pakistani society. Because again, you know, when I got there, I realized that here's one of these things that you don't, you know, as a foreigner, you hear a lot of focus about the, you know, the abuses of women in Pakistan, which are legion and deserve every bit of prominence that they get. But at the same time, you have women playing these very prominent roles in politics and in other fields. And I kind of wanted to use them, or to use them to explain, you know, how that works, how in this society that is still very patriarchal, you know, do women come to the fore? And in some instances, how do they use, you know, the criticism that was leveled against both of them when they were alive was that they were women of privilege, which they were, one from Punjab, yeah. One from Punjab. But it struck me that, you know, these are, the difference with most people is that they use that privilege, you know, to do their politics or to try and bring about the change that they believed in. And I thought that whether you liked them or not, or you agreed with their politics or not, I thought that, at least in itself, was noteworthy.
Totally agree. Okay, now we will take a few questions because we've got about 10 minutes. I just want to read something from the book, which explains exactly what the book is about. Declan writes, "There is so much more. In your book, you write, I had grown to love Pakistan, a country of hidden delights, endearing absurdities, and some of the closest friendships I had ever experienced." I think this sums up the book very well. And there's so much in it, and I wish we had more time because there's the exact story I wanted to discuss. There's so much more. There's so much more. But we'll take a few questions before we leave. Let's see. Okay, there's someone whose name is not here. He's asking, in the chapter where you discuss Jinnah, was there any British interest in formulating Pakistan or the two-nation theory?
I mean, that's a somewhat contentious question, and I can recommend some excellent books that'll, you know, go into that. But I would say, in short, you know, in the run-up to Pakistan, Churchill was Jinnah's man, or Jinnah was Churchill's man, depending which way you looked at it. And you know, Churchill was a, you know, divisive figure. In fact, you know, that in Britain, the character, the personality, the politics of Churchill is being revisited again right now, especially, you know, with this movement to tear down statues, and, you know, people, and, you know, you look at some of the work that has come out recently about, you know, how British colonialism in South Asia really worked. You know, you look at Dalrymple's book, The Anarchy, about the East India Company and so on. And I, you know, I think there is a kind of an overdue reckoning with what exactly British colonialism looked like in South Asia. You know, you know, because I think the British culture has very successfully mythologized it about, the railways and the bureaucracy and, you know, things like that. And clearly, there were some very brutal aspects to it. So anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. I'll just say briefly that in answer to the question, that you know British politics did play a role in Pakistan. You know, the two-nation theory and the Pakistan movement did have support in the British establishment. But, you know, it's my judgment, and I'm sure there are people who may wish to contest this, you know, that ultimately the political responsibility for what happened, for the partition of the country, I think comes down to, you know, the politics of India, actually, and to the Congress Party largely. I mean, certainly the Muslim League played its role, but the Congress Party, I think, bears a large part of that, of the responsibility. So, you know, I think, yeah, that's what I would say about that. But I think that the British, you know, the British, for me anyway, the British, you know, responsibility really was in the execution of partition itself, which was, I mean, criminal. You know, the way that it was rushed through, and in such a, you know, reckless way that it created a framework in which people were very fraught. The politics were just explosive, and then in the summer of 1947, we know what happened, and that was a great tragedy.
Declan, you covered the Red Mosque siege or event or tragedy, whatever one wants to call it, very closely. You covered it as a journalist. So there's a question on it. And it says, what do you think there was the actual cause of the Red Mosque siege, and why were girls the main part of the campaign? That's
a good, yeah. I mean, you know, that's a good question about girls, because that was another unexpected thing, of course. So, you know, I think we've, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people have not forgotten the Red Mosque, but, you know, it was in many ways such a seminal moment in Pakistan's recent history. And we forget, you know, that a big part of it was that Abdul Rashid Ghazi, that this thing came to prominence because, you know, there were these incredible images of these women who looked like stormtroopers because they were covered in burqas with sticks walking around the streets of Islamabad. You know, I think that there was definitely an opportunistic aspect to it, where I think for, you know, Abdul Rashid Ghazi and the other leaders in the Red Mosque, that they, you know, they knew that this was a way they were going to get people's attention with these teenage girls. I think, you know, it's harder for the security forces to, you know, go in and start beating up on a bunch of teenage girls in burqas. So I think there's an opportunity aspect. But, you know, to be fair, there was also an aspect where in the madrasa, you know, the girls were getting an education, and they were getting, you know, an education beyond just learning religious texts. And, you know, you know, when the questioner says, you know, what was the actual cause of the Red Mosque? I mean, the actual cause is a complicated issue, but, you know, what is important to remember is that what fueled it, and part of what fueled it was poverty and discrimination. And, you know, this is a mosque that drew in these thousands of young people from the hinterland of Islamabad and from the frontier, and they came, for the most part, from very poor families. Where, you know, girls had very few opportunities in life, and where the parents had very little money, and people felt a sort of resentment against, you know, the inequities. I mean, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think, you know, structurally, these are families where people see the inequities of Pakistani society. They see a small number of people who are driving around in big cars and have huge houses, and they see a lot of people who live in poverty. And, you know, I think that groundswell of poverty, it provides a recruiting pool, if you like, for people who are ready to take advantage of it. And that is part of the story of the Red Mosque. It's not the whole thing, but it's part of it.
Unfortunately, the end is always tragic, and we've seen it as in most of your characters, which you've discussed, like Gun Imam, Abdul Rashid, and the Dirty Harry of Karachi, and all that. And like I said, it's a fantastic book, and I would definitely suggest, I would advise, and people to read it. And it will be available in Pakistan soon. I think by next week, it will be available at Liberty Books and at Red Guard. And unfortunately, that's the only time we have. And thank you so much, Declan, for talking to us. And hopefully, I'm always hoping there's hope against hope that one day we will see you back in Pakistan, reporting again in the country you grew to love and the country which loves you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Nadeem.
Welcome.